So we're gonna jump forward light speed in the book of Job. Now, I read a lot of commentaries on Job, and they all took the tact of basically saying after the first 5 chapters or so, it'd be good if we could go right to the end of the book. We didn't. We went through 14 chapters. Now we're going to go to the end of the book. This is the way I kind of planned it. So for another, after we left off chapter 14, there's another 23 chapters. The conversations go back and forth between his 3 friends. And the crazy thing about, I don't want to go farther, I'm not quite sure they're in the Bible, but they are. I encourage you to read them. I think Elihu is the one who actually probably wrote these things down. But as they're going through this, they're bantering back and forth. But remember this, their 3 friends are one way or another accusing Job, saying, well, there's got to be some sin in your life. That's got to be what's going on. God wouldn't let this stuff happen to people who are righteous, would he? Reasoning sounds good, but it's not true. That wasn't what was happening at all. And by the way, as a righteous person who's trying to really live hard for the Lord, you're going to get hit. And sometimes we say, well, God's just, doing this and this. Sometimes it's Satan that's hitting you. God's allowing it to happen, but he's not hitting you. But you're going to go through things. And we're going to come down to God discussing why in a moment here, which is a real question mark in the whole book. Why, God? Why? That's our biggest question as we go through life. This doesn't go right. Why? This person didn't work out right. This person was a friend and they bagged on me. Why? Why did those people cheat me? Why did I get stuck with this house and it's falling apart? I don't know, God. Why? We've all asked those questions, right? We say, God, why? Why don't my kids love you? Why? Why is this happening? Why? And we just are just full of whys. Just whys everywhere. And God is going to answer this by not answering. You see, this is the lesson that we're going to have to learn. So the 3 friends have been talking back and forth with them. It's interesting. Nobody's praying. They're counseling. Badly, by the way. I was really thinking about this a lot, and I thought, how true it is in the Christian church. So many people will come to you, or they come to me in my office, or they'll hit me up Sundays, and they've got these counseling problems they want worked out, And I answer them. Of course, I'm very nice. I'm the nicest person you've ever met, probably. And the back of my mind is, finally I'll get around to say, well, how much have you really prayed about this? So often to find out, well, no, I want to talk with you first. I'm thinking, you got it all backwards. You should go talk to the Lord first, and you might not even want to talk to me afterwards. I wouldn't. Why don't I just know that we tend to do that. We go to our friends. We go to mom or dad or somebody else. We have a best friend, and we throw all of our junk up on them, and then we want them to try to help us, but you don't understand. They're not the one that can help you. God is the one who can help you. So it's got to start off with prayer. And Job may have been praying through this, but we have no record really. And we especially have no record of his friends praying, or Elihu, who is the next guy. After his friends get done with their nonsense, he comes along. He acts as though he's speaking from the Lord in chapter 36, and then goes on through 37. And he has a different perspective. Well, it's not sin in your life, but you're pretty prideful in the fact that you are being so righteous. It's true. He kind of driven him to that point. In his defense, he said, but I am right before God. I am. Job, keeps saying this. He says, I made this covenant. I will look at cast my eyes on no virgin. No, I will look at the babes. I won't do this. I won't do that. I've made these covenants before the Lord. He's saying, I'm righteous. He was righteous. So Eli, who is a younger guy, chides him for being prideful about his righteousness. Still, not one of those 4 people hit the nail on the head. Why was he going through all of this? Because Satan was putting this upon him, and God had allowed it. In fact, it was a challenge before God. And he says, have you seen then my servant Job? And so he's allowed to do all of this to him. Now, it's just terrible. You got to get the eternal perspective on this, but it goes a little deeper than that. So anyway, God is going to, in the beginning of chapter 38, when we get there in just a minute, he's going to gently rebuke, I believe it's Elihu who he's talking to in the first couple of verses, and then he's going to speak. And he's going to answer Job by not answering him. I I love this. Job's been under fire from Satan, as you know. Before God can answer or bless him, he must deal with Job's frustration. Is it justifiable? We would think so, but maybe God doesn't. And all of his questioning. And it's possible to get to the point of asking why Jesus is under pressure, and yet all it does is points fingers at God, who is not creating the problem. I got to tell you this. So you get your answer from God. What if it's not the answer you want? So you get your answer from God. Does it really change your life getting an answer from God? Probably not. If you're going through a horrific situation, maybe you've found that, somebody has stolen all your assets, and you're lucky to be able to hold on to your house and your car, and your dog. It's so bad, So God reveals to you, and he answers. He says, well, here's why. This person over here stole it from you. Okay. Did that solve anything? You're still going to lose your dog and your car and your house, right? It doesn't solve anything. And so many times we say, well, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God, why this? How many of you have ever done that? I'm not going to put you in trouble. How many of you have ever done that? I have. Back in my old sinful days, I have. No, I have. We all do that, but I want you to understand something. God is going to show you here the answers are not there. And by the way, who are you to question God? Who are you? That's exactly what God says in these verses here. Take a look at it, chapter 38, with me. God is going to go ahead and speak. In the first verse, it says, the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. Now, we didn't read it, but in the last couple chapters, you would have seen there was a storm coming up on the horizon. Elihu talks about it. And then, so basically, out of the storm came this whirlwind. And now God has spoken to the whirlwind in different places in the Bible. I'll mention some of those in a moment. But he speaks to him, and he answers him. He says, who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them. Well, God, you're God. Why would I need to answer your questions? I mean, you're God. You should have them all. Why? We're on the spot all of a sudden. Questions have come up, and if not verbally out of his mouth, they come up in his heart. God, why are my kids dead? Why did I lose all my possessions? Why are my body is physically wiped out with these boils and things? Why? And so God says, and while Job is trying to prove that he's righteous, as he does in some of those chapters, God did not answer, begins to state instead who God is and his power. Ever have one of your kids when they were little come up there and correct you in a way that was not correct? Dad, you're being mean to Mom. Who are you, your dad? You're a terrible dad to be mean to my mom. They come like that, and you're thinking, who do you think you are? Some little neighbor kid comes along and says, you painted that's a terrible color on your house. Or why'd you buy a car like that? My dad says those are the worst cars ever made. Well, you'd have to be, Dad says you're an idiot if you buy a car like that. And that little neighbor kid thinking, just go home. Who are you? God says, who are you to ask all these questions? He's going to rebuke his friends. Who are you to give this kind of advice to him? That will include Elihu, who's also giving him wrong advice, who actually, in chapter 36, verses 1-4, indicates that he is speaking from God, and he's not. There's a lot of that, thus saith the Lord stuff going on out there. So he speaks directly to them, to him, and the Lord is speaking to these other guys too, but he's going to speak especially to Job, but the others will be hearing this. And he begins to set them straight. The first questions might have been for Elihu, who claimed to speak for God, but all of them had spoken, including Job, without knowledge. They were all ignorant. The word is used right here, because Job didn't know what was going on either. But he wasn't giving advice. The other guys were. So he says, brace yourself like a man. He'll say the same thing, I think, in chapter 39 also, or chapter 40. Brace yourself like a man. He requires for us to man up in order to grow. To take life responsibly and to be able to correctly take the rebuke and the instruction that has come from the Lord. To be put into the teachable spot in our lives. And like us, Job is just like us. We're always asking God for this and for that, for questions. And God doesn't mind being asked. Like when you're a little child, you get a little boy there, and you're in the shop, and they got, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? A million questions. Well, they're little, and they're yours, and it's okay, You get a little older, the questions change in the teenage years. Why can't I have more money? Why can't I stay out after 10? Why? And all the questions are changed now. And then the badgering begins. Remember those days? They were the fun ones, weren't they? And so, and it's kind of like that same kind of picture right here. And it says, look, he just looks at Job and says, you need to man up, brace yourself. I got some things to ask of you. You've got to answer me. You've got to answer me. And that doesn't just apply to Job. We take a soft Christianity. And in our soft Christianity, we believe that, God, he is good and he is graceful. And please don't get me wrong on this. We take it that that's all God is. But he's also got a stern look for you every now and then when you're out of line. He's got questions, if you're listening, to ask of you that he wants you to answer. And we try to run from that stuff. But the Lord, if you're ever going to grow, you're going to have to brace yourself like a man and listen up and answer some things before the Lord. Just what he's saying right here. We're always trying to ask God for things, but God wants to run. He wants to ask us questions. Are you ready for that? Are you open to that, by the way? And so, interestingly, the questions are all that he asks are all unanswerable. He starts off with his creation, and he asks them these questions that Job can't answer, you can't answer, but it goes deeper than that particular thing, although I want to take the time to go through it, because this is the longest running conversation recorded of God in the Bible. So I want to go through it. Yet the answer was not as important as the fact that God was there. His presence proved to one thing already before the questioning comes to Job, God has not abandoned him. He's right there before him, talking with him. I mentioned a story of our life about getting back in the ministry. There's another little piece to that goes back just a few months earlier when we were in Mission Viejo. And we were out of the ministry for over a year, attending a church and just seeking the Lord, waiting on the Lord, talked to some district churches about going. But nothing was clicking. Nothing was working out. And I just remember being so frustrated during that time. I had 3 little boys. My wife was kind of looking to me, and I'm sick. I've got the why God, where God, when God kind of things going on all the time. So I'm sitting downstairs praying, kneeling or praying, sitting, I don't remember, down in the front room. Everybody's asleep, except for me, and I'm before the Lord, and I'm just weeping. I'm saying, God, I don't understand it. I feel like Jeremiah, I've got this call up in my chest. My heart to minister to people, to teach, and preach the word, it's there. It's just bound up inside of me. Nothing is opening up. Are you done with me, God? Do you want me to pound nails? What do you want me to do? What do you want? God, if you don't want me in the ministry, we went through Bible college, graduated when we were 21. We've been in the ministry for 8.5 years already. And I said, is that it? I kind of plan on it, being a lifer, What do you want, God? And nothing, not a word from God. But something happened, and it took me a couple days to catch hold of it. I said, take this out of my heart. And he increased it instead. And it hit me after a couple days. Oh, God answered in a different way than I said. I still have no church to minister to. I still have nothing. But the desire increased, and that was an answer from the Lord to me. Oh, okay. Well, let's just wait and see what happens. And I told you the rest of the story on Sunday. But God didn't abandon Job, and he didn't abandon me either. He hadn't abandoned me. I think of from Deuteronomy 31:8, where it says, don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you, and he will be with you, and he will neither fail you nor abandon you. Or we know the one from Hebrews 13:5 a little more. Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you had. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon. I will never abandon you. Schmick says, Job learned through the theophany, that's when God spoke to him out of the whirlwind, that God had not abandoned him. And it gradually dawned on Job that without knowing why he was suffering, he could face it, so long as he was assured that God was there and was his friend. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, that's all you really need in life, to know that God is there and he has not abandoned you. And he already promised that he wouldn't. I just need to know that. It was all that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego really needed, because he was the fourth man in the fire when they were walking around. Whether they got out of the fire or not didn't really matter anymore. They had Jesus with them. If I'm going to die with Jesus, if Jesus is standing right there physically, I think I could deal with that. Couldn't you? That's the way I'd like to go. I mentioned Sunday, I don't want to be crushed up by a shark or anything like that, but, if Jesus is in the water and we're all getting crushed together, maybe I could deal with it. That's all you really need. So he goes on in verses 4 to 7, and he says, well, let me tell you a couple things. Let me tell you what you don't know. And this is where we're at. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. A lot of tongue-in-cheek in here. Who determined its dimensions, stretched out the surveying line? What supports its foundations, and who laid its cornerstones? As the morning stars, that's another name for angels, or a ranking of angels, sang together, all the angels shouted for joy. It's an amazing passage. So at creation, all the angels were there, and the morning stars, the ones that are just called angels, they were all there, and they witnessed it, and it's amazing. They rejoiced at it. Now, they didn't advise God. They didn't say, why are you putting that over there? They didn't say, why is it that big? They didn't say any of those things. They just rejoiced at the fact God was doing it. God divided the waters, as we come down to verse 8. Who kept the sea in the sight of its boundaries? Who, as it burst forth from the womb, that's talking about the underground seas. As I clothed it with clouds, it wrapped it in thick darkness, for I locked it behind its gates, limiting its shores. I said, this far and no farther will you come. Here your proud waves must stop. Now, there's a lot being said right there, and I could give you a whole lesson on creationism in here. I'm not going to do it, but he simply says this, when I put this all together, where were you? Were you there? No. A lot of times when people go through things, it is our nature to have a quick answer for them. It's our nature to have a know-it-all answer. That's our nature, because pride puffs up. And to say, well, you should have done this. Or if I had been there, I would have done this. Or I wish I had been there, I could have told you how to do this. But you weren't. In fact, when somebody stumbles in a temptation, you really don't know how that all went down, do you? No. Because your experience and their experience are different. You say, well, I would never do that. There's a day when you probably would have, by the way. But maybe you wouldn't have, but maybe you don't have the same kind of circumstances. Maybe you don't have the same demons pushing that push them. You don't understand any of it. So instead, we're simply to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, to love our brothers as ourselves. Everything's wrapped up in there. All marriage counseling, all the way we counsel people, all the way we relate to one another is wrapped up in those two statements. If you love people, you know what? You cut them all kinds of slack. Because God does. He says, when you're having a problem, come boldly to the throne of grace. Isn't that what he says? Where you find help in the time of need? Yeah, that's exactly what he says. So we need to keep it in mind. We weren't there. He says, the angels were there. They rejoiced. They shouted with joy over the whole thing, but you weren't there, and you need to understand this. By the way, he makes a claim about the ocean there. He says, by the way, I put gates at it. Those are called cliffs and shores, and it can go no further. Do not be deceived by the nonsense of the globalists who talk about global warming. Did you know that yesterday it snowed in all 50 continental states in this nation? We have friends, Jerry and Janelle just went back to New Orleans. They had 8 inches of snow in New Orleans. Panama City, we have people there that were in the church that live there now. They've got 8 or 9 inches. We have people that moved over to Alabama, and they've got 8 or 9 inches over there. This is unheard of. Global warming? Really? That's such a scam. Obama, who pushed it, lives literally on the ocean, has this chunk of land with his monster house right there, right on the edges. If they were going to rise, if he really believed the oceans were going to rise due to global warming, he wouldn't own a home right where he has it. It's a scam, people. It's all it is. It's a scam. You cannot outthink, outdo, or change what God has established. He says, I set its gates, its shores, and it will go no further. I see these movies with these meteors hitting the ocean and this tidal wave, this 500 feet tall, coming inland for miles, states, whatnot. Come on, give me a break. It's just not reality. It's not what God has said either. And he also says, he goes on, he says in verse 12, have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise in the east? Have you made daylight spread to the ends of the earth to bring an end to the night's wickedness? As the light approaches and the earth takes shape like clay pressed beneath a seal, it's robed in brilliant colors. Did you see that tonight? Did you see that beautiful sunset? The brilliant colors. The light disturbs the wicked and stops the arm that is raised in violence. Have you explored the springs from which the sea came? We only discovered those about 100 years ago with submarines. They got springs come gushing out way, way down there. These are the fountains of the deep. Have you explored those? Well, of course not. He couldn't possibly in that day. Only with our submarines could we even inadvertently, accidentally run into those things to discover those things. No, you can't. Do you know where the gates of death are located? He had whined about that and said, well, I just want to die where there's nothing anymore. But that's not reality. In fact, he knew that, but he was so in such despair. He says, have you been to, people say there's no hell. Have you been to the gates of hell? Can you tell me? Have you ever seen the gates of utter gloom? Do you realize the extent of the earth? Tell me about it, if you know. By this point, you would think that Job is feeling dumber and dumber. He's probably not. But you know what's amazing? For all of his silence through this whole trial, God is speaking. The longest written spoken part of the Bible of God is being directed directly at Job right here. God is who has commanded all of creation, all the universe, all the morning stars, all of the angels, all of this, has set everything down for a moment and talked to Job for 5 chapters. Wow. So he says, you don't understand these things, you don't know these things. We don't know the real facts about death, only what God has said. And we know a lot more from the New Testament than we do from the Old. Only God, the Creator, knows the details. Then he says, let's take it a little step farther. Verse 19. Where does light come from? I don't know. Well, where does darkness go? Can you take each into its home? Do you know how to get there? But of course, you know all of this. I like the tongue-in-cheek. He's playing with him. He's not making him feel dumb. There's a reasoning for all that he's saying right here. He's settling down a tantruming child right now. You do know these things, Of course you know all that. For you were born before it was all created, and you are so very experienced. Have you visited the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of hail? I have reserved them as weapons for the time of trouble, for the day of the battle and war. Where is the path to the source of light? Where is the home of the east wind? I don't know. Do you know? I don't know any of these things. Do you know? You can't know them. My grandson was right when he says, I can't know that. He was right. I can't know any of these things. He asked him these things on physics. How do you know where light comes from? How do you know its source? Mocking him gently. He asked, are you old enough to remember? Oh, that's right. You were there, weren't you? No, of course not. He says, have you ever seen the treasury where I hold back the snow and the hail for warfare? It's amazing. No, you don't know any of those things. He takes it a little farther. Do you understand rain? Look at verse 25. Who created a channel for the torrents of rain? Who laid out the path of lightning? Who makes the rain fall on the barren land in a desert where no one lives? Who sends rain to satisfy the parched ground and make up the tender grass spring up? Does rain have a father? Who gives birth to the dew? Who is the mother of ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? For the water turns to ice as hard as rock, and the surface of the waters as they freeze. Have you seen this stuff? Have you seen any of this thing? Do you know where light comes from? Do you know where lightning comes from? Do you know where any of this rain comes from? Now, we can start to figure out some of those things, how they work today. We can see how they work. We don't really know why they work. We don't understand the hydro system of the earth. We don't really have a clue about this stuff. But he says, the point is, can you cause these things to happen? Can you cause lightning to come? No, you can't. We can spray a little area and try to get the rain to come in that short little area. But realistically, can you start any serious rain or snow or anything? No, you can't. So, and then he goes to talk about the constellations. Can you direct the movement of the stars? Binding the cluster of, how do you pronounce that anyway? No? Pleiades? What is it? Oh, Pleiades. Is it enunciated up there? Oh, I don't see anything up there. Well, anyway, they're a clustering of stars that they move about, but they move together. They're kind of got a magnetic thing. It's the weirdest thing. It's one of the weird oddities, wonders of the system that can't be explained by anybody. Scientists can't explain it. How do you explain the rings around Saturn? Or there's other planets that have those rings. How do you explain that? You can't. Why does it exist? How could it exist? If there's gravity at all, shouldn't all the rings just come back into the earth? If there's no gravity, why do they stay in a perfect circle like that? How is that? Can you understand any of these things? No, you can't. Or loosen the cords of Orion? Can you direct the constellations through the seasons or guide the bear with her cubs across the heavens? Do you know the laws of the universe? Can you use them to regulate the earth? You hear this little wimpy, no, because that's what you'd have to say. No, you can't do any of that things. By the way, some of your versions will use the word Mazzaroth. That's translated into the English word zodiac, and which is mentioned. I think it's mentioned 9 times in the Old Testament, but by that other name. And that God shows that. There's a wonderful book by Ogilvy. I have a couple of copies. Joe, I think I loaned you one time in spec here, but if you want to read it. But there's the sign, really, of the whole gospel coming to Jesus Christ in the stars. It's amazing. Now, the astrology movement has pretty much wiped it out and corrupted the thing, but that goes back all the way back to Isaiah, really, the corruption of it. But nevertheless, God originally did that and made it, so the psalmist could cry out, in his stars, his handiwork I see. The evidence is there. He says, for all of that, we only know these things. And in fact, we only know that there's a cluster of stars called the Pleiades or whatever it's called. We only know about that from the high-end telescopes that we have today. God's mentioning them right here. Job couldn't even see them. He's trying to show Job, you not only don't know what's going on, because you just don't know all of that. No man does. He's not mocking him. He's making a point that God is alone omniscient. And God has the right. We were talking back here a little bit ago, Eric and I, and you listen to the guys who are on the worship team, and it's amazing. They do just a wonderful job. But you get into orchestra where you've got 50 or 100 people there, and as you get into if Caleb's not in here, if he gets into the jazz band at CBU, there'll probably be 50 or 70 people in that jazz band. And you know what? They got to do what they're told to do by the leader of the orchestra. You can't choose, if you're doing the cymbals, to suddenly shoot off and do air guitar. It isn't going to accomplish what is supposed to be done. You can't decide to do a drum solo in the middle of something that it's not supposed to be. It has to be coordinated by the one who has designed what's going to go out there. And so we just got to understand, we are here as servants of the Lord. We're not here to tell him what to do or how to do it, or to ask him why, or why do we have to do it this way. But he's trying to point him out here that God is the creator, and he's the one who holds the keys to all that stuff. He says, so he goes on in verse 34, he says, can you shout to the clouds and make it rain? I love these. It's almost like there must be a smile on God's face when he does this. I think he's eliciting a smile out of Job's face, ultimately. Can you make lightning appear and cause it to strike as you direct? Who gives intuition to the heart and instinct to the mind? Who's wise enough to count all the clouds? Who can tilt the water jars of heaven when the parched ground is dry and all the soil has hardened into clods? These are great questions. Do you know the nature? Do you know how to make it rain? Do you know how to make it lightning? Do you know tell it where to go? Over time, modern science has made progress in answering some of these questions, and even that was prophesied in the Bible. It says in Proverbs 25:2, it is God's privilege to conceal things and the king's privilege to discover them. God conceals it, but he allows the kings or the king scientists or whatever, he allows those guys to discover it. And then these guys, they start naming stars after themselves, but they've already been named by God, the Bible says. They start saying, oh, look what we found here. Oh, this is great. Look at all this stuff. And God's saying, yeah, I know. If you would go back to Job, I already talked about that. But they don't do that. It's like, he says, do you understand? I'm even allowing you the opportunity to understand these things. However, with scientific discovery, we discovered the measurements and the distances. We still don't know the how or the why. I don't want to belabor this, but how does gravity work? How does it work? You remember, I've said this before, and it reminded me of it today. You remember when the old playgrounds, I don't know if they do these anymore, they had those neat things that went round like this, and you hung on and you spun it as fast as you can and get your friends on there. And after a while, they're hanging on for dear life, and their little feet are flinging out to the side. You're just waiting for centrifugal force to just get them flying, You did that? It was fun. We went home all scraped up and cut up and with grins on our faces from it all, right? World is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. 1,000 miles an hour. You don't realize it, but your surface speed is 1,000 miles an hour. Because this thing, well, roughly, it goes around in 24 hours. So with that thought in mind, if I understand centrifugal force the way I did on the playground as a kid, we should all be flying off of this thing. But we have gravity instead. Now, scientists will give you all kinds of nonsense. There's a lot of different viewpoints on how that works. You know how it works? Nobody knows. We don't know that. They'll tell you we have a heated core at the center of the earth. You know how they know that? Nobody knows that. We haven't been there. You know, we've drilled. I think we've drilled 4 or 5 miles into the depths of the earth, which is not even touching the crust of this earth. Because is I think is our radius something like 7,000 miles or something like that to the center, roughly 7,000 miles to the center of the earth from where you're sitting right now. 7,000 miles, and we've gone maybe 4 to 7 miles max. We haven't even touched it. We have no clue what's down in there. But they've all said, well, this must be. Okay, you say so. We don't know the how and the why of any of these things. We're not a whole lot farther along in Job. We got to just think, you think you know, but you don't know as much as you think you know. So he goes on in verse 39, and he says, can you stalk prey for a lioness and satisfy the young cub's appetites as they lie in their dens or crouch in the thicket? Who provides food for the ravens when the young cry out to God and wander about in hunger? You can't do any of that stuff. I have a few minutes, so we'll just take it into chapter 30. God continues these questions. Do you know when the wild goats give birth? Have you watched as a deer is born in the wild? Do you know how many months they carry the young? Are you aware of the time of their delivery? They crouch down to give birth to their young and deliver their offspring, and their young grow up in the open fields and then leave home and never return. He said, do you know anything about that stuff? He had thousands and thousands of cattle and lambs. He lost a whole lot of it in this whole trial, whatnot. But he says, for all that, do you even know how long it takes for them to carry their babies? Though he couldn't answer, he could realize one thing. While he couldn't answer it, he would be realizing through all this, as we can realize right now, yet God is a God of order. We ask God, but God's a God of order. Well, why is this going on? Well, God's a God of order. Well, why doesn't this work out? Well, understand this. Here's God's will. See it? This clear line is God's will. And we're all asking, well, why about this part? How come this part? This doesn't seem quite right. Wait, this is God's will. So you have air, and you have gravity. He holds a bound rein on society, so you have a structure to live in. He's given you the ability to have children. Don't know about that one. The ability to have children. He's given you ability to work and provide for your families. There's a structure that God has created. I don't care who's in charge of your government. God's created a structure that is pretty much across the world. And so we all breathe. We all don't fly off the planet. We all have, we're made in God's image. We're made to sustain at a particular temperature where it gets to be minus 120 at the South Pole at times of the year. It gets to be plus 140 degrees in some parts of the Mideast, which is why they're so cranky over there. With this variation in the earth, if the earth were just slightly farther away, we would all freeze to death. I mean, just slightly. If its own distance further, which is nothing in the spectrum of the universe, as you look at the distance between us and the sun, if we were to move one Earth over, you couldn't even see that by the naked eye if you're standing back looking at these two, but that would be enough for us all to freeze. If we were one Earth forward, in other words, let's call it another 15,000 miles further this way. 15,000 miles. We would neither be able to snore or live because we would be burnt up. Next page. Skip it down a little bit to verse 5. 5 to 8. Who gives the wild donkey its freedom? Who unties its ropes? I have placed it in the wilderness in its home and its wasteland. It hates the noise of the city. It has no driver to shout at it. The mountains are its pasture land where it searches for every blade of grass. And so he says, well, this wild donkey, now we have domesticated donkeys, but there's some donkey breeds out there that are not able to be domesticated. They're called wild donkeys here. He says, who can contain this? Nobody can. He won't listen. You can shout at him. He won't listen to you shout at him. He will leave you. By the way, it's the word in the Hebrew rim. It's the same exact word that God used for Ishmael, who will be a wild donkey. And literally, the meaning is a creature admired for both its freedom and its ability to survive under the harshest of conditions. This donkey is untamable. We've been able to tame some wild lions and tigers and orcas and things, but we can't tame that thing. Why? Why can't we not tame that one when we can tame a tiger? The answer to that is, I don't know, and neither do you, and neither did Job. There is no answer to it. It goes a little farther, verse 9. Will the wild ox consent to being tamed? Will it spend its night in your stall? Can you hitch a wild ox to a plow? Will it plow a field for you? Given its strength, can you trust it? Can you leave and trust the ox to do your work or plow? Can you rely on it to bring home your grain and deliver it to your threshing floor? This wild ox, by the way, is a bad translation. The King James Version will say unicorn. That also is a bad translation. The word, from what I understand, is the word aurochs. And aurochs is interesting because it's been extinct since the last one was seen in recording history in 1627. So it's one of those extinct things. We have the bones of it, though. They've dug up. It's the biggest of all the oxes we've ever seen. It's almost the size of a hippo. And it's not anything that can be contained. They can never domesticate it. You wouldn't dare trust it because this thing, just accidentally run over you and you're smashed flat, So it can't be bound for play. So can you master the wild ox? Oh, no, I can't do that. Well, how about the ostriches, the horses, the hawks? He goes on in verse 13. You say, does he ever stop? Yes. Not yet, though. The ostrich flaps her wings grandly, but they are no match for the feathers of the stork. She lays her eggs on top of the earth. She lets them be warmed in the sun. She doesn't worry about a foot might crush them or a wild animal might destroy them. She's harsh toward her young as if they were not her own. She doesn't care if they die. For God has deprived her of wisdom. He's given her no understanding. But whenever she jumps to run, she passes the swiftest horse with its rider. Why did God create that oddity with these big wings that can't fly? Why is it so stupid that he doesn't care if he steps on the eggs or if the kid dies? What's with this thing? You know why she does that? Nobody knows. Nobody knows it whatsoever. I read this from Mason. The passage is remarkable in that it contains the first and the only real humor in the book of Job. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think it's more. Leave it to God to pull a stunt like this, forcing a smile out of Job at a time when the poor fellow has been so intent on his misery. I like that. She has no wisdom. It's an example of God giving wisdom or withholding wisdom as he so desires. She is mean to her young. She doesn't care if she dies. Mason goes on and says, it was as though it was through wonderful and strange examples like the ostrich that God both taught and entertained Job. Get used to my absurdity. Live by faith rather than by sight. Be like the ostrich. Though you cannot fly, you can still flap your wings joyfully. Get over it, Job. You say, I don't understand why. Well, don't understand why. Well, I don't know why God doesn't do this. Well, he's just not going to. And he might get a kick out of watching you squirm a little bit every now and then. But God loves you. And by faith we live and we believe that God does love us. Can you understand or master the horse? No, you can't. That's his next question. He's powerful. Yeah, we domesticate him, but every now and then they bolt, they bite, they buck, they kick you off. So they're, if they want to, they could kill you at any given moment. He goes on with that. Do you understand or master the hawk or the eagle? Of course you can't. The great Chesterton wrote, the way God describes all of his fabulous creatures and parades them before Job, he makes each one seem like a monster walking in the sun. The whole is a sort of a psalm or rhapsody of the sense of the wonder. The maker of all things is astonished at the things he has himself made. The sheer majesty of these eagles and these raptors who could fly at an incredible speed. We were in Cody at... I guess that would be Montana or whatever, or Wyoming or whatever. Wyoming, I think it is. And we went to the Smithsonian thing there on Cody, and but they had these. Were those hawks, or it was a type of a hawk, and they were explaining this hawk to us. And he will go up, And his eyesight is so precise, he can be up there so far up there. And he will come in at, I can't even remember the speed. It was off the scale speed diving. And God has created him with tear ducts. Now, the guy didn't say God, but obviously it's God, that produce like a maple syrup kind of thing over his eyes. It comes over his eyes. So his eyes are wide open, flying at 100 miles an hour or more down to his brain. If they could see it, they couldn't move because he's coming in so fast. God's created, but we can't master him. He got to get it on his arm. He can do that. But you know, when that guy wants to leave, he's going to leave. When he wants to peck at you, he's going to peck you. There's a lot of trust between him and that bird, but by and large, that doesn't always happen. The eagle, put one of those things on your arm. Put him on your shoulder. He'll rip your shoulder off. You can't master him, he's saying right here. He gave us dominion, but that doesn't mean mastery. In Genesis 1:26, God says, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the wild animals of the earth, the small and the animals that scurry along the ground. We can say, okay, we've got dominion. That doesn't mean you can master them. That means you can control. That means you can run when necessary. That you can trap, that you can shoot, that you can kill. You've been given those abilities, but you know what? That doesn't mean you master the cobra. These things are realities, and he's just trying to get across to him that God is God, and we are not. But the sheer fact that he spent this time with him had to uplift the heart of Job. And God will restore to him in just a moment. Let me close out with this right here. He came not to ridicule him, but to teach him. God, teach us. If we're so prideful, if we've got so much pride in our ears that we cannot hear and see and observe the wisdom of what you have allowed things in my life. You say, well, I don't like the circumstances. You know, if you'll just understand the circumstances are just there for God to work his life and miracles through. The circumstances are just there. This church building here is just here. We could meet somewhere else. We'd still be the church. You're going to go home, you're still the church. You're going to come back, you're going to go somewhere else, you're going to go up the hill, you're still the church when you go up there. We just understand the circumstances are given to us by God. God never gives Job a reason for this long ordeal of suffering. That's not the point. You know what the answer is? Himself. God himself is your answer in life. One writer wrote, our thought, and only one, is brought into the foreground. One thought is brought in the foreground. The world is full of mysteries, strange, unapproachable, overpowering mysteries that you cannot read, cannot read. Trust in power, the power and the wisdom and the goodness of him, the Almighty One who rules it. Quit looking at your circumstances and look at the Creator of life, who has a great plan and a perfect will. And you know what? Your biggest problem is that you fall away from the will of God. Instead of asking why, just listen. Somebody was asking me a lot of questions about something the other day. I said, look, just read the life of Jesus. You want to know about this? Just read the life of Jesus. Read it over and over again. He's the only one who's like that. He's the only one who has those answers. Read the life of Jesus. It's that simple, really. What is it like to be God? You'll never know. We know what it's like to be the children of God when we look to God and trust God. We'll finish it over the next week, maybe two. We'll finish Job because he's going to come down one more chapter or two more chapters to this as he goes into restoring Job. But he's got more things. He's going to ask him again. He says, listen to me. I got some questions for you again. Brace yourself. You must answer me. But Job couldn't answer. You'll see his answer as he tries to come back. His answer is really repentance over his own heart. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that next week. Okay? I don't know about you. Job's been a blessing for me. I've learned so much. It's God's just teaching me. If you want to read all the rest of those other conversations, just read them. You know, find an easy version like the New Living to read them in because it can be ponderous. But understand this: it's just a great deal of battering him down. It's a picture of how Satan will use even our good friends, inadvertently, unknowingly, ignorantly, to batter us down and try to take our faith away. Job just had to get his eyes on God, and God is pulling his eyes back directly to himself right here. It's the only answer. It's the only answer. The only answer to your whys is to get your eyes on God. We used to sing that song. Remember that? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. The things of this earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Let's stand together. Pray that you would take these things and plant them deeply into our heart, Lord, so that we might quit questioning and start looking up. Never let even our best friends take our eyes away from you. Never substitute their advice or counsel for praying and talking with you. Help us with these things, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.